The Crystal Keepers. Chapter 5. One Last Chance. Mamie jolted awake from her dreams with a heavy gasp. She scanned the room to see the four clay walls and inverted staircase, as well as her small bed nestled in the back left corner. She realized she was still sitting in her wooden chair, seated directly in front of the table Daniel had brought for her. The book on magical interference was spread open to hundreds of pages deep. The current topic was about strange plants with names like poxroot and dying lotus. Mamie released the tight breath stuck in her lungs and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. She read from where she had left off. She remembered these plants were supposed to be useful in the process of coaxing out magical energy, but like the hundreds of other useless solutions Mamie had tried in the past 3 months, this one was likely just as nonsensical. Crush leaves into fine powder. Sprinkle leftover dust into a bowl of well water containing 2 toads, one with 5 limbs. Drink the water. Do not drink the toads. Toads must be kissed afterwards to align energy. Mamie pushed the book away in disgust. Very few understood the true processes of creating or restarting bonds of power, and books written by those people were now well beyond her reach, most being back in Denengir. Mamie realized she must have succumbed to boredom while waiting for Daniel to bring down dinner. He had been gone most of the day, and now even the tavern had gone silent. The tavern, Mamie said to herself, remembering where she now was. Sleepy Mountain Inn, by its proper name. The place that had become her new home, her new cage. Deep in the building's basement, hidden behind a long staircase, Daniel had created a hideaway for Mamie to stay in. A necessary precaution, as Mamie learned that the man had spoken the truth. All across Talmoria's towns were posters nailed up by the king's men with the words "Wanted" written at the top. Mamie kept one of these posters pinned to her wall as a reminder of what lurked outside. She had looked at the words, as well as the picture below them, many times, and now she looked again. The poster showed her own face, sketched in black ink, and she was described as being a dangerous witch. She was accused of having committed treason, theft, and murder by King Dukmot himself. The bounty was for her capture. She was not to be harmed or helped by anyone. Those that broke these simple rules would be hanged by the neck until dead, and each remaining member of a rule breaker's family would be inducted into royal service for the rest of their lives. Mamie wasn't sure what to think about that. It made her feel like a beast, like some wild animal that had been let off its chain. Every man, woman, and child in Talmoria was now her possible enemy. Not by any fault of their own, but because of the terrible will laid out by a king who decided he wanted his weapon back, no matter the cost. Even 25,000 gold pieces wasn't too much, and that was the reward these posters offered to go with all their threats. Mamie knew she could never step foot outside Daniel's tavern again. It didn't matter who she was or why she had done it. She stole the king's ability to save his people from a terrible disease, and to top it off, destroyed his Torchwing prison, and Veronica. Fleeing often felt foolish. Mamie was on the run because the king didn't yet know who the true thief was. But if he did find out, would he be able to believe it from her mouth? After all she'd done? It seemed like a guilty thing to do. Here she was, trapped in a dusty basement at the bottom of an old tavern, never sure if the truth would be known, never sure if it should be. Perhaps curing the disease really was the only way to prove her innocence, but that depended on restarting her connection to Mikhail's crystal. And nearly 4 months later, failed solution after failed solution, it was beginning to seem impossible. Mamie leaned back in her chair and shut her eyes, trying not to think. She could imagine the secret room so well from memory that she could see everything surrounding her without even looking. The small wood table covered in books and maps and scrolls, burning candles standing in pools of cooled wax, and the 3 glass jars she had taken with her on the night of her escape, air holes poked into each of their tin lids. The squeal from a board above interrupted Maney's thoughts. Someone was coming downstairs. Listening with her breath held, Maney heard slow footsteps descend to the basement before going silent. She was extinguishing candles as quietly as she could when she heard a boot knock against the stairs in a very specific pattern. It was Daniel. Maney went to the inverted staircase and unlocked the latches near the floor. She pushed against the staircase and up the wall went, folding in and over itself like a trap door. Daniel stood in a dim hallway before her, holding a plate of turkey and baked potato. "Brought you some dinner," he said. Maney released a breath. "Come in." He closed Maney's book and set the food on the table. "Eat up, it's getting cold. I reheated leftovers from the feast upstairs. It's your favorite, unstuffed turkey." Daniel stood back and smiled, putting his hands on both hips. Maney stared at the steaming food with an eyebrow raised. She hated unstuffed turkey, and Daniel knew that. When he noticed Maney's fierce expression, a smile fought to reveal itself, but he hid it as best he could. From the moment Maney first arrived in Farringall, Daniel had treated her like family, which, to her, felt so strange, because she had always thought of herself as a thing which other people used to achieve their own goals, or for the betterment of a society, rather than a person with actual feelings. She was a very important tool, one that could help cure diseases, and the thought of that had always granted Maney a great sense of pride. But with that ability gone, now she felt useless, like a broken limb. Yet Daniel hadn't treated her that way. It must have been because his daughter, Isabella, had been killed by the royal army that Daniel found no fear in helping Maney, a girl wanted by the same king who had caused his daughter's death. Daniel seemed to be a frail old man with silver hair, but inside him was the sturdiness of a century-old oak. He was someone Maney knew she could count on. "Where have you been all day?" Maney asked. Daniel chuckled, walking to the wooden table. He placed a cloth bag on the surface and stepped back. The strings were tied and the contents remained hidden. "What's that?" "Open it," Daniel invited with a smile. Maney didn't want to open the bag without knowing what was inside, but it seemed Daniel wasn't going to budge. "I found a man in Shorewood," he explained. "He knew a woman in Market Town who heard rumors about a sheep herder. The shepherd said something about finding a metal object partially buried in the fields outside his house, and he meant to sell it as a valuable trinket. I spoke to everyone in secret because I didn't want you to get excited if nothing came of it, but now that it's here, well, just open it." Maney's curiosity had been raised. She untied the strings, and inside the bag's mouth she saw a stout metal tower with handles and a dull silver bowl on top. Maney pulled the edges of the cloth bag down to reveal the device. She could hardly believe what she was looking at. It was a charging station. She turned to Daniel, almost unable to speak. "These haven't been used since the War of Light and Dark Magic. This is probably almost 1,000 years old. You know that, don't you?" "Yes, the seller said almost the same thing," Daniel responded, holding an unimpressed smile. "How much did it cost?" Daniel scratched his temple, looking annoyed. "Enough," he replied. "More than enough, actually. Spending a little extra coin is worth it if it means we're saving Talmoria." Maney felt guilty about Daniel using his own money. "That's exactly what I told myself as I handed over the coin," Daniel said with true sincerity in his voice. "I know why you're doing this, Maney. You don't need to convince me. I wouldn't have bought the thing if I didn't." "Thank you, Daniel," Maney said. "It's nice to know someone has confidence in me." "I think you have all the confidence you need in your own heart. You wouldn't have made it this far if that wasn't true." Maney paused, thinking of all she had done to make it here. It didn't feel like success, It felt like a string of failures. She lifted the necklace over her head and held Mikhil's crystal by its long silver chain, letting the rock hang and spin in front of her face. She stared at its translucent blue surface, the rough, jagged edges, and the twisting black cyclone housed within. The crystal was the size of her thumb, and the charging station seemed meant for much larger crystals than this one. If the device were to be used properly, Maney knew that her own energy would be interchanged with the energy of the crystal placed inside the bowl. But the blue crystal was dead, and so, it seemed, was Maney's link to it. She knew she would have to try the charging process in reverse, using her lightning power acquired from the missing purple crystal to channel energy into Mikhail's blue crystal instead, hoping the exchange would be enough to restart the blue flame. It was hardly a clever solution, but if she was ever going to escape her new cage and possibly return home, this plan would have to work. Maney drew in a deep breath, and as she exhaled, let a trickling stream of electricity surge through her fingers and into the device. The crystal reacted almost immediately, rattling around in the bowl as if it had come to life. She turned to Daniel, heart alive with anticipation. "Keep going," he said. Maney took another breath and let it out slowly, sending a second surge of lightning into the device, much stronger this time, making the crystal jump. Maney stopped and coiled the crystal's necklace over the stone to keep it in place, then began again. This time, blue sparks shot out of the bowl like a fountain of sapphire light. The metal of the charging station groaned and vibrated in Maney's fingers like it was trying to escape her grip, but she kept going, her mind heavy with exhaustion already. As the electricity in Maney's fingers grew stronger, the charging station buzzed, its metal turning red with heat. Smoke rose from the wooden table where the surface had gone black beneath the device. Maney leaned away to hide from the radiating temperature, but still kept her fingers latched to the handles. The device squealed and bent, crumpling like melted wax. Then the silver bowl on top grew a split down the middle with a metallic snap. The entire charging station hissed like a river of steam. "Get down!" Maney screamed, diving out of her chair. The charging station exploded into a fountain of golden sparks, shooting shards of metal across the room. Fragments peppered the clay walls as the table erupted into a cloud of wooden shrapnel. The blue crystal flew to the back corner, bouncing twice before it clattered out of sight. Maney sat up and uncovered her head, shaking splinters from her blue hair. She waved her arms to clear the air as dust and smoke filled the tiny space she now called home. Daniel crawled out from behind a chair, unharmed. The old man looked stunned. "Are you okay?" Maney asked, coughing. "I'm fine," Daniel replied. "Are you?" Maney looked at her arms and legs to be sure they were still attached. "I think so." "Good," Daniel said, using the tip chair to stand back up. He looked at the remnants of the turkey dinner he had brought down, which was now spread across the room. "What in the world just happened? Was it supposed to explode like that?" Maney rubbed her eyes and tried to calm her pounding heart. This was far more excitement than she had been ready for. "Not usually." Daniel went to Maney and put out his hand. Maney reached up and grabbed, letting him haul her back to her feet. He swept the shreds of wood and dust off her shoulders and took a step back. "So," Daniel said, "did it work?" Maney's mind went back to the crystal. She looked at the table and saw nothing. Her eyes went to the corner near the end of her bed, where the 3 empty glass jars were kept. There she saw the blue crystal, leaning against her leather bag, its silver necklace coiled around the bag's handle. Maney went over and grabbed the stone, holding it close to her eyes. Within Mikhail's crystal, Maney still saw the tornado of darkness hovering there like an inky cloud. It seemed to be a portal that led out of existence, a tunnel to a place where not even the faintest light could escape. Just 4 months ago, there had been a dancing blue flame inside Mikhail's crystal, but now she saw nothing, just twisting, turning blackness. The charging station hadn't changed anything. Maney turned back to tell Daniel, but her eyes must have spoken the truth before her mouth had the chance. Daniel held his chin and shook his head. It didn't work, Maney said, despair bending her voice. Daniel sighed. I thought this would finally be the one. His voice was low and somber. We'll just have to keep trying, he said after, reversing his deflated tone. I know you'll figure this out sooner or later. That crystal can't stay dead forever. Maney felt so defeated she could hardly stay standing. The charging station had been her penultimate goal. She was so sure that if she could ever get her hands on something like that, all her problems would be solved. Now that it was over and her best chance had failed, she felt like going to sleep and never waking up. Maney ran fingers through her hair, exhaustion dragging on her mind as if her body had turned to lead. What about the protectors? She asked. Have you heard anything about them? Daniel shook his head. Nothing. I've been asking everyone I can trust. No one has heard anything solid in almost a decade. Maney's heart sank. She was desperate for some kind of an outcome. She needed a new plan, but what plans were left? All of her possessions were back in Deningir, including the purple crystal she misplaced years ago. Maney paused. She had no words to finish the sentence with. Daniel looked around the secret room, then walked past Maney and sat on her bed. He put his hands on his knees and drew a deep breath. What if you just gave this whole thing up? He asked in a soft voice. What if you just forgot about finding a cure to the Grey Death and tried to move on? I can't, Maney said, even if I wanted to. Do you want to? Maney could hardly breathe. The true answer was yes. She wanted to go home more than anything, to see her family again, to have a normal life. But it didn't matter what she wanted. Mikhil's crystal was in control. Or it always had been. She just didn't realize that until everything had gone wrong. I can't let innocent people die, she said. They depend on us to do the right thing. But what if you can't help them? What if all this sacrifice is for nothing? Maney couldn't allow that question into her mind. It threatened to unravel her entire existence. Daniel, I can't go home. I can't even go outside. What other choice is there? I know, Maney. I just wish I could see you do something besides read old books and look at dusty scrolls all the time. I wish you could just have a normal life. Maney thought about what she must look like from the outside. I don't get to have a normal life, she said. The crystal took that from me a long time ago. She remembered the day Daniel found her starving in a ditch at the edge of the road after her escape from the tower. Somehow she wished she could have just stayed in that forest and faded out of existence. It might have been easier that way. It'll be all right, Maney, Daniel said in a soft tone. I know it doesn't seem that way right now, but it will one day. I promise. Tears appeared in Maney's eyes, choking her voice as if a hand was gripping her throat. She fought them back, knowing that if she responded now, they would release in stinging waves. Daniel stood from the mattress and grabbed Maney around her shoulders in a tight hug. Thank you, Daniel. Without you, I don't know what I would have done. I'd probably be dead. I don't believe that. One day you'll look back on this night and realize how much strength it took for you to make it this far, and you'll understand you're still the same person who carried that strength. Tears broke through Maney's eyelids. She couldn't hold them back. She hugged Daniel and buried her face against his shoulder. You would have been the best father any girl could have asked for. Daniel sniffled as if her statement was too much for him to bear. He squeezed Maney tight and tried to hide his sadness. Thank you, Maney. I wish I could have been for a little bit longer. They held each other without speaking for a long time, then let each other go. Mamie felt less scared than before. Her mind had finally stopped worrying about the future. She felt like she was ready to fall asleep at any second. "I'm sorry about the letdown," Daniel said in a tired voice. "I wish today would have gone differently." "So do I," Mamie replied. "But I've still got you, Daniel." She smiled, and Daniel did the same. "Get some sleep for now," he said. "We'll talk about our next plan come tomorrow morning." Thump, thump, thump. The sound roared across the entire tavern. It sounded like someone had tried to beat down the front door with a tree trunk. Mamie's stomach churned and boiled with nausea as panic bubbled up her throat. "Who could that be?" she whispered. Daniel looked over his shoulder with wide eyes. "It's past midnight. I have no idea." He turned and retreated from the secret hideaway. Mamie followed him to the entrance, then stopped. "Stay here," he ordered. Mamie obeyed, but she didn't want to. Her stomach wanted an answer now. Daniel reached up and grabbed the staircase, pulling it down gently to make very little noise. Mamie stood back so she wouldn't block the way. She heard Daniel's boots thump lightly up the stairs and overhead. "Who could it be?" she asked out loud, hoping for relief from the possible answer. It was the cook, Stella, returning because she forgot a bag or left her coat. Or maybe a drunk who lost his key in one of the empty mugs again. It could be anything, or anyone. Mamie felt more calm, but when she heard the rapid pace of Daniel's returning footsteps, she knew something was wrong. He came down to the basement and lifted open the staircase, then stared at Mamie for only a quick moment before saying, "They found us." End of chapter.